Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Teeter, and on today's Teeter Tales, I'm going to be doing a review of Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Remarkably Bright Creatures is Van Pelt's first novel, and it is a standalone adult contemporary book. For this review, I'll only be going into mild spoilers for things that are revealed within the first third of the book. Let's go ahead and start. The book actually has 4 point of view characters, those being Marcellus the octopus, Tova the 70-year-old widow, Ethan the local grocery store owner, and 30-year-old Cameron. Tova works at the aquarium in Sowell Bay, a fictional small town set in western Washington. She works there to help distract herself from thinking about the death of her son Eric, who died tragically when he was 18, and her husband, who died a few years ago. Tova finds herself gradually befriending Marcellus the octopus, who has a tendency to escape his tank at night. Tova has a small friend group in Sowell Bay. One of her friends is Ethan, the owner of the local grocery store. He cares for Tova perhaps more than she realizes. Meanwhile, Cameron is living in California and can't seem to hold on to a job for more than a few days at a time. He was raised by his aunt since the age of 9, and he's determined to look into his absent mother's past to discover who his father was and see if he can get some money out of him. As I mentioned earlier, Remarkably Bright Creatures has 4 point of view characters, and Van Pelt does a great job of bouncing between those points of view and giving each of them their own unique style. Marcellus is the star of the show with his first person, or first octopus narration, giving a different perspective on all the different plot lines throughout the book. The other narrators are close third person, but Van Pelt still gives them each their own distinctive voices. Tova's chapters are often tinged with grief as she thinks about the losses she has experienced. Ethan is the town gossip, and he likes to pry into the lives of other characters, but typically out of genuine care. Cameron is the hot-headed, restless young adult who has trouble sticking to anything. Van Pelt also includes numerous details that pleased me. The scientific facts she incorporated about octopi and marine life just made me smile. She also has a clear knowledge of Washington state, and while there were a few differences between the book and reality, I was mostly able to identify the places and the scenes that she referenced. Van Pelt is just generally a great writer. She is great at balancing scene and summary, telling and showing, and she is able to write scenes in the present and then switch to a flashback or a memory of a character and do it in a way that pushes the plot and story forward and maintains the pace. If you saw my review of Shark Heart, you know one of my biggest issues with that book was that there was so much going back in the character's past that it prevented me from connecting to their present. And Van Pelt avoids that and balances the flashback and the current scene very well. I found myself genuinely caring about most of the characters by the end of the book, and that's a very high compliment. Though Marcellus opens the book with saying he doesn't have that much longer to live, I still found myself falling in love with the octopus and was thrilled with all of his tender interactions with Tova. Speaking of Tova, I really found myself wanting everything to work out for her by the end of the book, and I was happy whenever a chapter would focus on her or Marcellus. Though I'm typically not much of a romance fan at all, I was very invested in Ethan's interest in Tova. I was cheering for him to finally confess his feelings to her and was very invested in their potential romance. Cameron was the only character I found myself actively disliking in the book. His bad attitude toward almost everyone and everything immediately soured him for me, and I was frustrated by a lot of his impulsive actions, though they were in character for him. His early treatment of women didn't help, as I felt like he was objectifying them. That did get addressed by the end of the book, and I feel like that was part of his character development, but it still made it hard for me to like him. By the end, I at least found that I was interested in his story, and even though he wasn't one of my favorite characters, I could still tolerate him and be interested by his story. This book is actually a bit hard to discuss. On the one hand, it seems like it has so many different plot lines that are running in different directions, but the further you read, the more you realize the plot lines are actually running together, not away from each other. Tova, Ethan, and Marcellus had very apparent connections right away, and their storylines hooked me from the beginning. Cameron's chapters were the only points where I felt the plot and pacing fell off. His story took a while to connect to anything else in the book, and while I understand now that he is very vital to this story and his story is essential to it, I still feel like he had too much page time devoted to him early on when he wasn't that relevant to the plot. Remarkably Bright Creatures does have a fair bit of content to consider, the primary thing being the language. There is a lot of swearing in this book, most of it coming from chapters involving Cameron. The S word seems to be Cameron's favorite word, and he thinks and says it very frequently, though a few other characters will also say it. The F-bomb gets used twice in the book, again, by Cameron, once near the beginning and once towards the end. There are other mild profanities that are used often, and crude and profane names like a-hole are also tossed around. Cameron tends to call people that pretty frequently. There were also 2 uses of the B word. I will re-emphasize the majority of the swearing comes from Cameron or chapters involving him, but since he is one of the main characters of the book, that does mean this book has very frequent and heavy swearing. There's also some sexual content in this book, though no explicit scenes occur. Innuendo and crude comments do pop up sporadically, again typically involving Cameron. For example, the first time his girlfriend makes an appearance, Cameron ogles her backside and wonders if she'll want to have sex later with him. He also admires the chest and backside of a young woman that he has just recently met. This ties into his objectification of women and why I really disliked him early on in the book. Again, he improves, but it was still uncomfortable and frustrating to read. There are other scenes I'll mention. At one point, Cameron discovers that his aunt is being treated for a mild STD, at which point he begins to prod her about it and she begins making suggestive comments until he quickly changes the subject. A few crude references to anatomy are also made, and one scene leads into a pair stripping, although nothing is described, and the chapter ends before they actually have sex, though you know that's where the scene went. I also will mention that several of the main plot points of this book revolve around teen pregnancy, and having sex in high school is almost treated as a given. There's also drug and alcohol content to consider. Cameron's mom is repeatedly referenced as being a drug addict, and Cameron begins the book with a hangover. We later find out that he frequently gets drunk and kind of parties. Other characters like Ethan also drink alcohol, but they tend to do so responsibly. There's also some speculation that a teen had a tendency to sneak out with the beer from his parents' fridge. This book is not violent, but the biggest plot point does revolve around the fact that Tova's son Eric drowned at the age of 18, and it is unknown if it was an accident or suicide. Another character also references convincing a woman not to kill herself. Remarkably Bright Creatures was very different than I was expecting, but I was surprised by how much I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the book was going to be almost completely focused around Tova and Marcellus's relationship, as that's kind of what the cover shows and what the description talks about. But that plotline actually took up way less of the book than I thought it would, but it was still very well done. That plotline and the others all went together really well, and Van Pelt still managed to hook me into the story. I wasn't super interested until around the 50-page mark. It was still well written and I was enjoying it, but somewhere around that time the characters and plot really clicked for me and I wanted to keep reading. I did figure out the mystery of the book very early on, even before Marcellus, who figures it out well before all the humans in the book, but it was still immensely satisfying to see the characters slowly discover the mystery for themselves. I don't typically read books like this, but I'm very happy that I gave Remarkably Bright Creatures a chance. It managed to incorporate themes of grief, closure, and family all into a book that encourages nerding out about marine wildlife. As someone who loves animal biology and good storytelling, this book really hit the spot, and I would recommend it to anyone who isn't turned off by the admittedly pretty heavy content in the book. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope this review was helpful for you. Bye!